1. Each stage of education involves different factors that affect both students and teachers. If we add to this the introduction of new technologies and trends, we find that the learning process becomes increasingly complex. Thus, in the case of institutes and universities, it is necessary to recognize which are the social and pedagogical variables that are involved, allowing to establish clear objectives. To this the didactic one is dedicated, by means of the use of different techniques and methods of education. The aforementioned specificity is fundamental in order to achieve the educational objectives that have been set, which are part of each study center and the school programs that they have. This can be seen in the plans prepared by the teachers, who seek to organize and manage an adequate education in the classroom. Here, aspects such as their experience and available resources should be considered, making this process a simple task. All this makes it necessary for teachers to develop a didactic knowledge, adapting their skills and dexterity to the requirements of higher education. They not only have to take into account the theoretical and practical aspect, but focus on their cognitive and social skills. Likewise, they must be people who praise ethics and moral values, in such a way that they can transmit these same convictions to their students. The use of intuition next to common sense is also very helpful. In the universities and technical institutes, there are certain variables that require a didactic different from that of basic education. This is due to the fact that the majority of students are adults and young people who seek to integrate into the labor sector or train themselves to obtain a better position in their work. In this way, we can consider the experiences they have had previously, as well as their motivations and what they hope to achieve on a personal and professional level. To establish the best approaches and methods, which allow articulating an effective pedagogical project, it is essential that the didactic proposal meets the requirements of each career and curriculum. This involves a series of challenges, which are usually related to socio-economic factors, the new demands of the market, and the hiring criteria of large companies. In conclusion, the only way to face the reality that we live today is by carrying out various adjustments in the educational system, this being an obligation of each government. While the institutes and universities must prioritize the evaluation of their teachers, to ensure that they are up to date on the teaching techniques and methods that make up the teaching. Not only is it a valuable tool for education, but it is an essential discipline for the proper development of students. Ka. 2. Education is a right. Before it was a privilege that only the upper classes had the opportunity to obtain, but over the years, and the restructuring of governments and social systems, this could be changed. However, a concern remains latent. I am referring to the low level of education that can be found in some countries of South America, such as Peru, making its improvement extremely important and the analysis of why this situation. It is necessary to reflect on several aspects that influence the development or deterioration of an educational system. Also, it is important to define concepts such as culture, which is understood as everything that brings together the capacity of thought of an individual, their literary and artistic knowledge. The level of education in third world countries, as is the case of Peru, is a clear reflection of the lack of importance that governments have in this area. Or maybe it is the opposite, and they do consider it relevant to maintain a mediocre level in order to better control the masses. This is an alarming possibility, but it has always been present in different social and political analyses. Teachers are poorly trained and do not update their knowledge. Then, when they teach certain subjects in schools, it is the students who are affected by these deficiencies. The problem is that this represents an endless cycle, since these same students, in many cases, will become professors or professionals with a low cultural level, which in turn will be transmitted to a new generation, and so on. On the other hand, there is the bombing of junk material that occurs in the media. Television and radio are not regulated in any way, which results in the creation of programs that, instead of complementing the education of the individual, end up contaminating your mind with nonsense and highly irrelevant content. Although it could be argued that there is a lack of economic resources to invest in Peru's education, this would be an outright lie. Well, the government and the municipalities prefer to carry out investments where there are cases of corruption and money laundering, leaving aside the state colleges, institutes and universities, which could use that money to train their teachers and improve their facilities in favor of all the students. The low level of education that has characterized Peru for so many years is a consequence of several factors. Among them is an inefficient government, poorly trained teachers and media that transmit material that contributes nothing to the culture of the individual. This must change, since the lack of basic skills in a population has long-term negative consequences on the economy of every country. SSSSSS. 3. Nowadays, it can be perceived that culture is becoming a less important aspect in the lives of people. This is something very worrying, even more so if we take into account that school literacy rates are higher than in previous years. Then all that remains is to ask yourself, is modern life and culture incompatible? To begin, according to the latest edition of the Dictionary of the Spanish Language, the second meaning of the word culture is a set of knowledge that allows someone to develop their critical judgment. This definition gives us to understand the importance that it has in the life of every individual, because an adequate cultural level will provide the necessary notions to think, and not simply let go. In modern life, society rejects some conditions that are basic for reflection and introspection. These are the same as an average person would cultivate through reading. So, it is logical to assume that the drastic reduction of this habit has negatively affected their capacity to make a critical judgment. Most books that are acquired have a very poor quality. There are the famous bestsellers, which are prefabricated pieces that do not contribute anything constructive. While self-help books, beyond transmitting a valuable message that motivates the recipient in some way, leave aside the process that would allow him to reach that conclusion on his own. It does not exercise your mind, and only accepts the information it captures. On the other hand, the majority of the youth population, in countries such as Peru or Mexico, has stated that they have never read a book. They even feel proud about it. Reading is rare for them, and they experience discomfort when they are approached on the subject. They argue that they do not have the necessary time, or that they prefer to dedicate it to supposedly more useful things. The lives of these people oscillate between obedient work and the banality of their free time. In their leisure time they prefer to feed their minds with nonsense that appears on television, or that they themselves search on a website. This means, for example, that offers great freedom for the acquisition of knowledge thanks to mobile devices, is used to be aware of highly irrelevant viral trends. The importance of culture in the life of every person is indisputable. Its deterioration is caused by the replacement of the philosophical logic in favor of educational reform, which aims to create the entrepreneurial individual. Likewise, the reflexive look that art provokes manifested in different ways, and that was a basis of society for centuries, must be recovered. CCCC. 4. There are certain conditions that allow any person to perceive a sense of well-being and satisfaction. This is what is known as quality of life, although it is necessary to understand that it is a concept that implies several levels of generalization, both socially and personally. Thinking about this, in the present essay I will seek to analyze its most important areas from a multidimensional perspective. In the first place, physical well-being must be taken into account, which is a consequence of two fundamental aspects. On the one hand there is health, which depends on the capacity of each government to designate economic resources that allow the construction or maintenance of hospitals. Here also include prevention programs and training of the personnel involved. In many cases this reveals an alarming reality, where economic growth focuses on the accumulation of material and monetary wealth, leaving behind the quality of life that people have. The other aspect is the physical security of each person, which is in constant danger given the increasing crime rate in the world today. This makes it complicated that any citizen can focus on their personal development or on maintaining their family, because they are always exposed to robberies, kidnappings, or even murders. In this way, the state is in need of establishing effective policies to combat crime, either by improving its police force or by enacting more radical laws. Quality of life also implies material well-being, which is defined by the ability to feed oneself correctly, the possibility of obtaining housing, the state of transportation, and working conditions. Taken together, these variables have a negative or positive effect on social welfare, which affects personal relationships and community existence. When these environmental and psychosocial dimensions are taken into account, the concept of quality of life can be analyzed from an emotional point of view. It is here where religious beliefs and the spiritual aspect gain greater value, because all people need a mental stability to feel good. Finally, it only remains to say that the government of each country must prioritize the quality of life of its inhabitants. One way to do this is by taking as an example the realities of other more developed nations, where people live better and are happier. This not only means respecting their rights and freedoms, but it is the only way to access sustainable development as a society. Cat 5. The evolution of the family in the current times. The traditional family model has changed over time. Currently, the society praises other values and takes into account very different criteria. Likewise, interpersonal relationships have evolved and the role of each person has had to adapt to new ways of seeing the world. For these reasons, it seems necessary to analyze and reflect on the changes that can be perceived in current families if they are compared with those of past decades. The modern family has several characteristics that differentiate it from the traditional one. The role of women is no longer limited to that of housewife, but thanks to the restructuring of rights and equalities by gender in most countries, their incorporation into the workplace is perceived everywhere, and every time more women are seen occupying positions of power or seeking to do so. An example of this is the last presidential election in the United States, where the Democrat Hillary Clinton was present. Although you can still find families composed of a heterosexual couple and their children. Other family structures are also found. Today, it is common to see people of the same sex entering into a relationship, with adopted children or previous relationships, which grow in an environment far from prejudice. While the number of divorces and separations, which has increased over the years, has resulted in single parents raising and educating their children on their own. On the other hand, it is unfortunate that in these times there is a superficial and materialistic perspective. Children are inevitably affected by this, becoming competitors of the expectations and the desire for power that many parents put forward. Professional and economic aspirations come first, affecting family stability and psychologically hurting children. Another factor to analyze is the loss of interest in marriage. People prefer to maintain a cohabitation and over time obtain certain legal benefits. It is a comprehensible decision if it were only about his life, but as it influences the mentality of his children, it will eventually destroy a concept that in the past was one of the pillars of society. In conclusion, we can realize that the modern family is radically different from the traditional one. The woman is not only limited to housework, but becomes an economic support for it, and its relevance in positions of power has led to a more inclusive vision of the world. Also, you can find a greater presence of divorces and separations. While the most worrisome is the priority of work, money, and personal benefits over children.